Recording. Okay, so be mindful that this is being recorded and it will be left for the group and others that have not been able to participate. I think we are more or less all here today, but still you might want to listen to it again. And lots have happened since we spoke last, and it's not done. I don't feel a particular need to go into extreme details. I am holding the webinar on the 7th of December, and it is full now. So the doors is closed. If any of you wanted to get on, it's full now. So I'll keep what I want to say about the new timeline and the situation in the States and whatnot. But what I can bring to the table right now without getting too far into details of this or that or whatever, because I don't find that to be conducive to give that energy to look at with the question, as things are now, where do we begin? And personally, I want to share how I see the energies and what's going on right now. Of course, what's going on in the States, I've been seeing that for years. Those of you who go back with me, you know I've been talking about this, the great segregation, all of these dynamics. In the Higher Order Psychic Energetic Institute YouTube, the Hope YouTube channel, I have put the next level of activation where I have contemplated on some of the dynamics that are going on right now and some of the solutions into what to do. So I feel, so if you want to go more into details and have that, then I've given out publicly what I feel needs to be said and what is prudent to be said out in public. With attention to the group energies, this is, of course, all impacting us in different ways, and we are treading into new territory in many ways. And since we're doing that, there are certain dynamics that I feel play quite a significant part in how I experience my everyday life. First and foremost, as I've had many times before, when a great shift is coming, is this feeling of catching up and finalizing or getting things done that has been accumulated. And put it this way, for me, I always say the last 10 years have been the worst of my life. Anyways, but the last 4 years have been very, very compacted with what we could say, if I'm being kind, I could say it's a training for what is part of the 2-8 pillar. If I'm being less kind, I can say I've been used as a guinea pig to see if humanity could enter into the 2-8 pillar, come out on the other side, and enter into the 1-7 pillar. And from the standpoint of the different groups that have been trying to do that, to undo the effects of what happened back then with the 2-8 pillar and revert to some of the original programs that are aligned with the groups that were part of the 2-8 pillar. These are the materialism and greed alliances. For those of you who are smart, you can see what I'm playing with. Instead of saying it out in the open, I am cloaking it, but these are the type of souls that are now at play. And they belong to the 2-8 pillar. And the 2-8 pillar has, if we say the 3-9 pillar, had kind of a surge of a specific type of energy that activated humans in a specific way. And that one was fear. What we are entering into with the 2-8 pillar is anger. And looking in the last 4 years, similarly as I had the training before the pandemic from 2016 until 2020, early 2020, everything I had trained there, including at my stay in Australia, I could see what was unfolding during the pandemic. So I was kind of already settled before that happened. So for me, the isolation and not touching anything, and everything was full of energy imprints and whatnot, and the shedding and all of these things, I kind of already, once it kicked in, it didn't really bother me because I'd trained it beforehand. And I feel the last 4 years with what came my way before Josh came into my life and after he came in, and some of the things that I went through with some of the entities that belongs to the 2-8 pillar, has shown me, as well as whomever would like to assist humanity in clearing as our reality field goes back in time and clear the different levels. It is kind of clear for everybody that this is probably not going to happen, because what is stored there was a reason why the astral barrier, aside from all of the manipulation and all this stuff, but originally it was put up to create a barrier to the 2-8 pillar. The 1-7 pillar had kind of grown into the maintainer grace and technology, but the original content of that one had already, due to the impact of the timeline event, lost its foundation. So we can say the 2 foundational pillars of the Pillar Project, because of the timeline event, were already taken out of play. And if you ask me, is it necessary to go into these 2? I can't say, but the laws of the cycles demands that everything goes back to the point of origin, as you remember from the Souls of Humanity and other places, that once the timeline event hit, it was like a wave that went out, created time out to the perimeter of our universal structure, and then it bounced back slowly. So we're still having one push, that kind of the expansion as science is seeing the background microwave pattern. That's the remains of the timeline event. But there is this, that's the physical that keeps expanding and fizzling out into nothingness and connecting more and more to the void. So that's kind of where you could say the dematerialization or the evaporation dynamics of the timeline event. But the higher order energetic effects of the timeline event is this bouncing, like if you have a rock in a bathtub. It will first ripple out to the perimeter, and then it will begin to bounce back in, creating interference patterns. And that is technically, when I talk about the resetting, that is what is happening. It has bounced out and then is resetting back into clearing up the effects of the timeline event. Thus, the natural dynamics of the sciences of these higher order holographic energetic quote unquote explosions or expansions out into a large field will have to collapse. And that's the resetting, as the time wave, the timeline event wave, bounces back, collapsing on itself, and then goes back to the singularity event. So technically it has already done that on the higher levels, the 6-12 pillar, the 5-11 pillar, the 4-10 pillar. We have now completed the 3-9 pillar, and then there's still the 2 last steps. That means that while the cosmic fabric, if you would call it that, are doing its thing, it's up to us to navigate in this weird environment of the souls that belong to these pillars are now getting their chance to undo the effects of whatever their completion cycle holds. We also know that the groups of the 2-8 pillar, which we clearly see in the different front figures that are now popping up in the States and all sorts of weird places, they have no return path. For them, this is it. They complete by going into either taking over or evaporating. It's all or nothing for these groups. They don't have the in-between. They cannot turn around. They do not have any viable genetics. They are tied to reality grids where the timeline event hit as hard as possible on what we call the mammal avian level. They have no need or no wish or no incentive or no understanding, nothing of anything that could lead to anything good. That's the timeline I've been talking about for a long, long time that will lead to these disastrous, unfortunate futures. So that must play out because it's already played out. The question is then, can have the traveling back in time from the future humanities have that paid out? And we could say in a way it has and in a way it hasn't. The way it has is that in the first run through, there was no alternate timeline. There was only that one main timeline that led to a very, very unpleasant future. So at least now there is a possibility for the alternative, and that's the alternative timeline I'm going to talk about in the webinar. So I'm not going to give all of the little nuggets here because I'll know that later on. It's a slow reoccurring understanding. What I've also talked about is to be able to get onto that one, because we are dealing with what's called the path of least resistance. And this part of the esoterics, they always talked about that the patterns that are so ingrained will be the first go-to for most people. If we are to go beyond the pull and the guardian of the threshold that pushes us constantly into the bad choices, we must really, really, really put all our effort in to understand the dynamics of opposition, the fourth dimension, as well as the dynamics of polarity, the fifth dimension, and at the same time, avoiding the false fourth dimension as well as the false fifth dimension, because the future timeline that are coming up is now playing into the false Atlantean fifth timeline. With that, also activating some pretty old Atlantean technologies. With that said, the possibility that we now have is that other type of timeline, we could call it the one that goes to the right, is fueled by the energies of the Andromedan core. And that's been the plan all along. Does that mean it saves us? No, not at all. It gives us a possibility. It gives us a choice. But the other path that leads to, we can see it all over the world right now. Everybody's playing out their 100-year cycle. We are in very, very similar patterns as it were 100 years ago. It plays out differently, as I mentioned in the podcast on the Hope Institute, because the souls that are now playing the game are different. But the repeat of the patterns that once were from the timeline event are technically the same. But the souls that are doing it are interpreting it differently because our society is different today. But we still have some pretty global issues, political, financially, as well as within societies. Are we going to close around ourselves, or are we going to expand? Are we going to follow the pull of reaching the singularity event where we either must collapse and cease to exist, or do the synergetic leap, the frog leap, not over the back of others, which is so interesting because it's always, when it took me a long time, this kind of American frog leap, you actually jump on top of someone else to get somewhere. That's not what I mean. But this kind of where the frog suddenly does a very high jump, or like a virtual particle ends somewhere else, because the current environment is literally just getting so clear that we cannot stay there. So with that in mind, that we are to understand that we will be up against the hardcore worst patterns within ourselves as things are right now. The things that we have not cleared will be amplified by the collective energies into negative patterns of segregation, division, anger, disappointment, and whatever you can come up with that are tied to this feeling of anger. And trust me, I'm dealing with some of my own anger issues, because I've noticed that I do have, as well as I have a very strong energy. If I get angry, trust me, you will feel my anger. Some of you have already felt it, but it's still been restricted. But sometimes if I really, really, really set my boundaries up, then what I feel right now is that anger will tap into the collective 2-8 anger energy. And that's demonic. So we're talking about a completely different type of anger. And that's the anger that spawned the madness of the First World War and spawned the madness of the Second World War. And no, we are not going to have a Third World War, because we already had it. So we are going into something different. But while that is playing out, and this is where Noah showed me years ago, that if people really get caught by this anger energy due to the feeling of lack, due to financial issues, everything is very, very expensive. We are getting into an environment where the understanding of resources are not plentiful, abundantly everywhere. Yes, there's plenty of water, but it's not necessarily healthy water. It's not necessarily drinkable water. Yes, there are technological solutions for everything. There are non-technological solutions for everything. It is not about going into the fear of lack or the anger of I have less while others have more. And that's where we're shifting into where we before could have this fear of not having, or fear of losing, or fear of something. The collective energies are now going into the anger, which we're seeing with many of the young men in America, kind of the anger of not having a female, or females being angry with males. And we have that in Europe too. I'm not saying it's just there, but it's just so prominently extreme in the States, because they're playing the 2-8 pillar to the dot. And that's what you're going to deal with over there. So it will be very, very clear. You have politicians that have no political experience. There are all the whole shebang of actors that are playing out a role that they have no knowledge of, taking away the original bureaucracy. So nobody's going to play anything. Nobody's going to have any understanding of politics or how to run a country or whatever. So it's going to be very interesting. But that was the 2-8 pillar. Everything turned into turmoil and chaos and cannibalism and anger and wars and all sorts of the worst things that the mammals can come up with. That played out in the 2-8 pillar. So it's up to us to understand these dynamics. So in that way, does it then mean we can't be angry? Well, I'm still working on it's not saying the solution, because there are no solutions. There are transformation of the original patterns that leads to anger, that leads to the feeling, which I remember growing up with, this feeling of I'm not being very personal here, but why is my daddy giving my sister all the attention while I get none? Was there something wrong with me? And then you go into this bouncing, like children do, go into this bouncing. Is it me? Is it him? Is it her? What's going on? And then ending with, there are two solutions. That is the psychodynamics of that. Either you turn it inwardly and then you say, well, it's because there's something wrong with me. I'm probably not lovable, so I'm probably a shitty person. And I took that one. So that took me a long time. So that's sadness and not understanding, and what have I done, and why am I not likable, and why I'm not lovable, and why is he paying attention to her when I clearly can see that she is, kind of Jacob and Esau, this kind of more dense, hairy being. Why is he paying attention there? And my dad has explained that later on, that he said, well, Randy, you were so strong, you could take care of yourself. So instead of saying, and instead of me getting that energy that it's a bad excuse and it doesn't take away his responsibility, but that's his excuse. Whereas my sister, she was weak like my mother, so he felt she needed more attention. And I know it's bullshit, and I don't buy into it, but that is how it was in his mind. Of course, as a parent, you take care of your kids the best way you can, right? You can't say one has the right to more attention than the other one, because of course it has an impact. But that's part of the program. Anyway, so that in itself, when we have this feeling of being ignored or not being seen or not being heard or whatever it is, can then either lead to sadness and self-deprivation and self-destruction, or it can lead to extreme anger and outward, acting out, which boys mostly do and females mostly choose the other one. So in these weird screwed up family dynamics that we grew up with. But even though that, when I say what's the root of my anger, is because even though I chose the self-destruction, well, that's technically, if we really want to go into this, then it has a polarity. And that is where the feeling of self-destruction then become like an enormous nuclear bomb once it turns into its polarity. So that's kind of my dynamic, which I'm fully aware of, that I need to learn to set my boundaries and not be in this weird pattern of, for instance, giving more than I can give. I've just had a recent example of that. Being dragged into games that are orchestrated by souls that are greedy, using my energy for their convenience because I'm a kind person, so I want to help. But why do I want to help? Well, is it perhaps I want to be liked? Is it because I want to be acknowledged? Or what's going on? So these are dynamics that when we talk about anger, yes, it is a boundary setting type of energy. But it's also, it ties into childhood patterns that could either be neglect, or it could be abandonment issues. It could be bad parental strategies, whatever that means. It can be 1,000. That's for you to figure out what is fueling the patterns that you hold. Some of you say, well, I'm surrounded by people who actually say, well, I used to have anger, but I don't really have it anymore because kind of work with it, it's over. But if a person like me that is able to imprint on many levels of the energy system of people, most people have anger on a very, very broad scale in different patterns, if not from this life, then past lives. So even though we say, well, I kind of dealt with it in this life, well, what about that life and that life and that life where we were treated like shit and had miserable lives and felt this scarcity and felt this, why do they have when I don't? The majority of humans on this planet, the souls that are recirculating, have been living in the worst possible scenarios that any being can be put in. It's always just been this 1 or 2% that had reasonable lives. The rest of us have been miserable and have gone through all sorts of circumstances that naturally creates anger. And we can say now with Josh that is so intertwined with Buddhism and me trying to get so much out of it. So that's an interesting dynamic, right? But the whole understanding of that life is dukkha, out of whack. It literally is out of whack. And because it's out of whack, then we crave something to take the out of whackness away, to take the frustration away, to take the anger away, to take the sadness away. Or as I talked with Louise about early on, about this, that people go into the people that are doing the Buddhist path, they begin to hunt the samadhi, the joy, the feeling of sitting in this bliss state and not knowing that this is just one part of the path. That's the counter to the dukkha. That's the counter to the distortion on the astral plane, where you learn to meet everything with a kind of balanced approach, understanding that whatever rises up will fade away eventually. Not that we are to say, well, everything will fade away and then we just sit there like passive slugs and not doing anything. There's plenty of people that chose that too, or went into oblivion, and by that took away their possibility of actively transforming their energy system, thinking, oh yeah, the cycles will take care of it, or the councils that went into stasis because the cycles will take care of it. Whatever's coming our way, the cycles will take care of it, which is a misuse of the cycles. And we are going into next year into the main theme of next year will be power, the correct use of power. So if we're saying, well, the councils wrote off their responsibility, went into stasis because the cycles will take care of it, that's wrongful use of power. That's wrongful use of the natural laws of energy. Just because we know how things work doesn't take away our responsibility. So the inner work here relies heavily on the 2-8 pillar, has specific signature things that is important. Step 1, it is tied to the female energy. Step 2, it's tied to reproduction. Step 3, it's tied to suppression of large group within our global community. Particularly the female group, but we are also having within the female group, we are having some very, very old upper level demons that are now surfaced, and we have a lot of weird stuff going on. So it's not just all females are part of that, but that energy, that extreme negative energy, there's the subcurrent of the 2-8 pillar, allows for these female demons to rise up, or what you could call they are technically not female, but they prefer to be in a female body, but what is in them is more what we would call some kind of very nasty masculine type of entity, an old humanoid from the 2-8 pillar. But point being is there are we could say the female genome in the next 9 years will probably have different challenges that it will undergo as it clears out the lower levels of the XX chromosome figure that were seated in the 2-8 pillar. The Y chromosome, as part of the males, should have technically cleared themselves out in the 3-9 pillar, which is now over. And the dynamics, as I see them, has been to prevent that from happening, so that when the females, because if the males had reached the XX chromosome throughout the 410 pillar clearing processes that release the contracts, and the 39 pillar clearances, which we had the last 9 years, then if they had turned into becoming what we call the X pentachrome, as in X5 of 4 tiers or 5 tiers with a fourth and fifth dimensional configuration connected to the original fifth dimension and not the dark Atlantean falling angelic timeline, which most males are now connected to, well, then the female population that could have done their cleansing of the 2-8 pillar would then have had a supportive male, would then have had a male with an activated heart field that would be able to transform the extreme events that took part during the 2-8 pillar. But this has been taken away, that's not there. And we could say the last opening was to choose between bad and even worse. Again, with a female president that was not elected. And again, Trump won over, which is still this kind of the 2-8 pillar conundrum. I'm not saying it's better or worse, and I'm not going into political discussion about whomever and whatever, what they are and what they're not are, because I don't care. These are dynamics that could have been lessened by specific choices. It does not take it away. It doesn't make it better, but it makes it less potent. It's about nipping the highest levels of dynamite out of it, which could have happened if you had got a female president over there, but you didn't. So now we're back into that one. So point being is that if we were talking about worst case scenario, we're getting it. So that's important to understand. That's why when we do talk about anger, and when we do feel anger coming up, for me, it's now such an explosive power. So after the last little event I had here on Monday, I think it was the 18th, of course, go without saying. Or was it Tuesday? I can't remember. It doesn't matter. I kind of decided for myself, that's probably the last time I'm doing that. It was suitable. There were some boundaries I need to put, but I didn't have to put it that way. But the way I observed the energies, I felt why that was happening. I felt now is the time where anger is no longer conducive in the manner it used to be. Anger is now becoming a very, very dangerous force due to the networks that are being activated now. So that's kind of the thing I want to put in here, where we're earlier on the last 9 years had a lot of fear of activation, fear of this, fear of that, and whatnot, leading to fear of life and fear of death and all these things that are part of the reality field configuration itself. We are now going into this whole segregation, anger, suppressed groups that are now getting a voice, that feels the need to rise up, fanatic understanding of things, whatever that means. It doesn't necessarily mean religiously. Let me put it this way: when we talk about some of the groups within the LBTG plus, sorry, I'm not into all of these letter things, but some of the groups, the hybrids that are in there, they are too, in their way of working with things, being extremely fanatic. We are also seeing, for instance, the transhuman thing, which we know are different types of insectoids that are playing around. And there's always been these groups where a male soul is in a female body and a female soul is in a male body. And I understand this is difficult. It's not that I don't understand it, but it's the fanatism that comes behind it. The kind of, now we're saying this is okay, and since that is okay, then suddenly the rest of us are no longer okay. That's where people get fanatic. Then that's where inclusiveness becomes suppression, as in you are forced to change sports. For instance, letting transgender males that feel they are females to play on female soccer teams, or getting into the dressing locker. I know I get into this, but just so you understand the we feel it. Those of us who are looking at it, feel that you might feel energetically and consciously and emotionally like a female, but you are still in a male body with male muscles and testosterone. So unless you're on pills that takes away the strength of a male, you are still biologically a male, even though you're Your psychological structure is female, but that doesn't give you the right to go in and play as a female. You're still physically a male. So there are certain levels there, and again, this too can tap into a lot of anger and a lot of resentment. And I understand what it means to be different, and it's difficult. As I said, it's not that I don't understand it, but fanatic ideas have many what do you call it, many colors, many different dresses, and this is what we need to be observant of, as in saying, yes, I understand what you're saying, but there are still, again, some things that rationally and logically should be allowed to say without people who are saying it being hunted down and executed for just having a little bit of common sense. That's just one example. The UAP can blow into that too. This is what these energies do. Anything, including, I just saw the climate meeting that they are having now. Normally, when we talk about UN, it's always diplomatic, and we are talking the kind talk. So we find solutions, even though people go out in the hallway and yell at each other. While we are around the negotiating table, we are treating each other nice. We've seen that they speak the sweet tongue, even though they think something else. But that's the game. Right now, people are literally leaving the negotiations in anger. So that means we are also having a political system, a financial system, whatever we're seeing, people that are running amok or getting angry somewhere, or whatever's going on. In a way, it feels a little bit like the movie The Bird Box. Not that I'm saying it is that way, but there are forces here that amplifies whenever there's a spark of something, like we felt it with the pandemic, or we felt it with other circumstances in our lives, with the fear energy, how it suddenly could grow into something very, very big and completely consume us. And where fear leaves you sitting in a corner, shaking, a little bit exaggerated, but you're not acting out on fear unless, of course, you have something else that goes on. Whereas anger has the possibility to either extreme self-destruction, aka suicide, or the opposite, acting out in aggression that leads to segregation and unfortunate side effects that hurts and harm other people. These are the traits of the 2-8 pillar. So the challenges for us in the next 9 years, and that's why I put this little podcast in. It first came up as simple loving. That's not what it was. Simple living and resilience. Pay attention to all the little things, how to arrange yourself in a way so that no matter what happens, if the waves of scarcity comes your way, then when you feel the scarcity of why do some have and I don't have, or whatever's going on, because we know that's a program playing out as well, as we're seeing it unfold now. The ones that used to get by doing what we could call work in kindness or helping others. Most of the alternative community has been taken out. Getting a job is impossible because we haven't been out in base program for years, etc., etc. So things are definitely playing on this one, removing what were naturally coming our way. The inflation, the prices will level up in the States. Is going to be literally a shit show with whatever politics that has been promised that would quote unquote materialism and greed alliances back on the game. And now you have probably got what I'm saying here. So all of that will play the small amount, as it were in the Middle Ages, back into the hands of a very, very small group that are very, very unpleasant, that do not share whatsoever. What most people have been seeing as the elite and the nobilities, as I talked about in some of the podcasts on ACAST, they belong to the colonizing or the colonial extraterrestrial programs. They are no longer here. So that's the old world order. That's no longer there. So we are stepping into something that's even more primitive and even more divided. So whatever's been promised over there is the typical, we will make it better. That's the speech of the tyrant. that goes in and say, I will make it better, and I will remove the current government, and I will remove everything that's there that is rotten to the core, and then I will select who will come and play that will be so much better. That's one person promising that, and when one person promises anything, that is unrealistic. That's the tyrant speaking, because that's not possible. It must always be a collective. It must always be some sort of democracy. So the choice that have been made is to revert whatever's going on in the States, and whatever grids that could have been healed are now being reverted to an even older type of energy that technically some of the original indigenous people were supposed to heal the land, which is part of the Hopi prophecy, as you know, and by that help the network of America to blossom out of the fallen Atlantean timeline configuration, which unfortunately is not going to happen. So for those of you who are this group that are in America right now, you now begin to understand that you are in the middle of a country that's going to play out some pretty difficult patterns, let me just put it that way. And the solution is, but that's unfortunately not now, that will come, I think it's 50 years into the future or something, but there will be 3 areas in America, up around the area of Maine, up in the north before the border to Canada, but up around Maine. California will also, it's called free zones. So you will have one up around Maine, and you will have one around in California. And there will be one, it's not Florida, but it's close to Florida, but I don't really know exactly. I can't see it clearly because that's a little bit uncertain. But 2 that are pretty much right now, because they have already have a long history of being what the old-fashioned type of democratic kind of governance in these 2 areas. Because of that long-rooted and the factions that live there, that type of colonial forces that are there, they will do what they can to try and create what we will call free zones, where the rest of America will be part of that future timeline that nobody really wants to be part of. So that's a little hint, but that's 50 years into the future. I don't know what bumps they need to go through to get to that point. I don't know what type of inner earth collaboration that would be necessary to keep these 2 free zones up and running. It is based upon some old gate technology. I don't know if that's going to be activated, and onward and so forth. So it's still very, very in the making, but that will happen. And since that comes as an information, that means that America is now going in a direction where what could have been healed, similar like Australia also had that choice 4 or 5 years ago, but didn't take it. Well, then these networks, due to the level of karma and bloodshedding and atrocities, do not have the outlet for healing, and that means there's only one way for them to go, and that's the collapsing. And that's the issue with the 2-8 pillar. There is no in between. In the 3-9 pillar, we had the middle path. In the 2-8, you have either or, in or out. So that's the issue with the 2-8 pillar, where things get very sharp. Where are you? You remember me a long time ago saying you can't sit on 2 chairs. You have to make a choice. And from what I'm saying here to those of you who live currently in states that are Republican, I don't see it as a possibility for you in the long run, because whatever's going to happen on a national level due to the Republican overtaking of the House and sorry for me, I'm just saying Senate, House, Congress, whatever it is, it doesn't matter because they're everywhere. And whatever's left of Democrats will have so little say in any process that the democracy in America is non-existent from January 20th. And that means that up until now, you have, yes, lived in a Republican state, Florida or whatever, and it has been nice and it's been okay because there was a little bit of what we call political back and forth. There was a little bit of, I call it bipolar. I know that's not what it's called, but there was a little bit of, it's okay that we have this 2-party system. That's the game. where one is in opposition and the other one rules, and then we shift it once in a while so everybody gets their piece of the cake. But what you're going to experience now is that whatever's left of the democratic organs, institutions, they will be pressured, and there will literally be this push where democracy is effectively from January 20th no longer in play. And that means some of you that lives in cities, in states, in areas that are currently Republican, I think you should seriously consider to go to some of the states that have been democratic for a very, very long time, that is not a swing state, that has been foundationally from the get-go a democratic state. And that's the only advice I can give you. I know it's impossible, and I don't know how I will respond to a thing like that, but there's a reason why I have been pushed out on the island now where I'm living, far, far away from everything. I'm not having a fridge. I'm not having a washing machine. I am being told to have as little electronics as possible, to completely shut them down when I go to sleep, shut as much down. I don't have the Wi-Fi on, shut it down. I have fiber, but I'm shutting it down. My phone is turned off. My computer is completely turned off, not even gone into sleep. It's literally this understanding that the world we know of is changing foundationally, and the more quote unquote primitive, and that's what I mean with simple living, the more simple we can live, the less we will crave and the less we will be impacted by the greed energies, the less we will be hit by the feeling of lack or distraught over not having while others have. If you settle yourself in communities where everybody has the understanding of having little and have chosen that as a way of living, then that looking to the neighbor or he or she has more than me will not be present, because you have chosen to situate yourself in an environment where the overall understanding is these are the circumstances. As here on the island, for instance, we know we could potentially have lack of water, so we take care of the water. We know we are not linked up to some of the more efficient heating sources that you normally have on the mainland. Here it's all warm. We call it warming pumps. I forgot what's called over there. So in that way, everything is more expensive, which I am seeing now. The bills are kind of, and I need to learn how to deal with that without diminishing the quality of my home, so it doesn't get fungi and all of these kind of things. So the ability to live in environments in this extreme simplistic way of living and downsizing the type of food and relying more on what we call higher forms of energy that comes from within, etc., is part of the way of navigating through the next 9 years, as well as go rural, as well as for those of you who have a job that are in big cities, and if you have to do public transportation and whatnot. Depends on, of course, the country you're in and how things are playing out. But for those of you who are here, we have Britain and we have Australia and we have Denmark and we have America. These are part of the countries that has a karmic imprint back to 100 years ago with Second World War, that has imprints back to in some of the lineages that were colluding with the negative energies, etc., etc. So it's everywhere. But how the political scene and how the foundational governance is being impacted by, of course, is different from the different places we're talking about. All right, I think that's kind of what I wanted to say here. Well, that was 45 minutes just blasting away there. So the inner and self-improvement work now, I kind of said that at least the next 3 years for now, for sure, will be about lack, will be about anger, will be about some of the very, very old ingrained female patterns. I'm not saying Me Too movement because we kind of had that surge and it fizzled out again. But the fact that the female energy has been suppressed since the foundation of the 2-8 pillar, and that males, also part of the 2-8 pillar, were pushed into being predators. So males will have to deal with their predatorious type of approach that can get fueled by anger or feeling unfairness or feeling of lack or feeling anger towards the system or whatever it comes up, however it comes up, or feeling conspiratorially dragged into seeing all sorts of weird scenarios, which is going on in America big time in some of the programs. So that's kind of the male trap that needs to be avoided with kindness, and this is where technically Buddhism approach with kindness and compassion and the understanding to transform energies into heart energy comes in play. So that's the challenge of the males, where the females are in a different position of not getting into spilling over into the opposition of after having been suppressed, turn out to be the executors or the ones that becomes the queen of hearts and just becoming unpleasant altogether or super angry or standing our ground, which is the wrongful use of power, but it is associated with a type of empowerment. But it's not an empowerment that goes into, yes, we are allowed to express our anger, but as I said, we should have done it the last 9 years and not now, because now we're being fueled with other stuff when we're trying just to put our boundaries up. We're being fueled with shit that will not help our case whatsoever, which is kind of taking away our healing possibility. So to put it this way, with the choices that have been made, the healing potentials we could have had in the 2-8 pillar are not existent, are not there as things look now. I'm not saying it's going to stay that for the rest of the next 9 years, but I'm definitely saying that there were choices given on different places that were not taken, and that has led us into the path of least resistance, and that means jumping right back into the old timeline. To get on the new one, which I'll talk about in the webinar, will be of our doing, our choices, and we must arrange ourselves physically so that we are in an environment where we are not constantly in the opposition, as in, for instance, if I don't think any of you are living in Texas, but if any of you were, that for me that would be, yeah, there's a very dark portal there. So living there is absolutely a complete no-go because of some of the things that have happened there. I would say, even though the Hopi technically had that area around New Mexico and Utah and whatnot, I was there around Phoenix. And the Apaches, they spilled so much blood and led so much negative falling angelic energy into many of these grids. And since many of the ones that were there were more peaceful tribes, they got slaughtered as well from within their own genetic lineages. So I'm not saying that that area that the Hopis were supposed to create as a nodal point can rise also because of what's been done to the indigenous people of America or the Atlantean Pleiadian reseeding of the red-skinned, whatever you want to put it. So point being is that some of the things that could have healed has effectively been taken out, and the genome, the gene pool that are within whatever's left of the original Pleiadian infused red-skin that was supposed to found or ground that healing power into the network of America to undo the events of Atlantis. I talk about these different colors in that 4 or 5 podcast series I have on the Hope Institute. So that's why I'm just talking about it this way. So if you want the background, you haven't listened, you can get it there. That's been taken away. The majority of the healers that are supposed to help the land were undergoing sexual abuse and alcoholism and all sorts of things that have tampered with their genetic purity. So they can't hold the torch. Meaning that then there's only one thing left, and that is the collapse to get to the original dynamic of the singularity event. All right, so with that of the 2-8 pillar comes what is the counter to anger? And it is very, very difficult when you are, that's my experience. But again, because of all the shit I've gone through, I've done many lives and got access to so much. And I imprint from other people. And that means if I get angry, I become just as magnetic as I am in everyday life. If I get angry, well, then my magnetism kicks in there and then I pull in all sorts of weird stuff. So for me, this is, okay, I need to find other ways of putting up my boundaries. And if I feel the anger, what are the solutions then. So there's a whole learning process for me as well that needs to get in play for me as a person with the energy system I have, or should I just completely evaporate something? Anyways, there's a lot. I haven't figured that one out yet. But point being is that the challenge we have now, because of what anger and how anger energy works, including the 2-pillar, kind of the light and the darkness that is part of the 2-8 pillar, the top level of the Orions of the 2-8 pillar, the baseline that goes into the what technically created males and females, the atrocities that led to that, the whole archaic type of energies that are founded in brutal, predatorious suppression, feeling of lack, anger, enslavement. All of these things are on the table. And the question is, how do we deal with that, and how do we navigate through the circumstances under these collective energies, especially if we are rooted and seated in or live in a country that has now chosen to become the outlet of the 2-8 pillar. And that means you guys over in America. So all depending how things are going, first move is to find a place where the democratic governance still is somewhat represented, whatever that means. Where I would also say another indicator, that's why the whole abortion thing has been up there, because if females are not in their own right to control their own body, whatever that means, then if you get raped or whatever happens, or in an incest or whatever, and you get pregnant, well, that's how you generate more dirty souls into this reality. So if, for me, as in kind of Josh's family is living in Missouri, even though they voted for abortion, it is still Republican. It is still old Republican territory. So for me, it's very clear that no, I can't go there. That door has closed for me as far as things goes, which is unfortunate because his family lives there. So what do we do with that? Well, then we can say St. Charles and St. Louis are technically, to a degree, brotherhood and technically a degree democratic, but the state itself is not. So is it enough that the city is democratic when the state is not? And I would say, if I were to play safe, I would go for the state level as being the one that needs to be democratic, not just the cities, because these are just small enclosures, and they can easily. I saw a little cartoon of The Simpsons, where the family goes into want some apple pie or whatever. They go into this drive-through. And everybody's sitting there with the MAGA cap on, the red Trump cap. And then they ask for that, they want that, and they don't have the red Trump cap on. And interested as there is there, everything goes silent. Everybody's looking at them, and they literally just run out. They ask the pancakes to go, and they just run out to the car, feeling how all of these red-capped people just closing in on them, feeling very ominous. And that's kind of how I see that cities within Republican states, the people who live there are probably going to feel it quite narrowing and restraining, even though that they say, I live in a peaceful area. The question is, how long can you keep a peaceful area if everything else is pressuring on you to go the opposite? If the laws on the high level of the state is going in one way, then the power of the city is less than the power of the state, which we know. Okay. So with that said, I think that's kind of what I want to say for now. The other ones kind of tap into, it is a journey for us. There are no overarching solutions, as in just do this and that, whatever, then things will be good. It is, as always, a process, and it's our process. It ties into our personal experiences. It ties into our psychodynamics. It ties into our past lives. It ties into our original energy system. It ties into holographic energetic architecture. And all of that is us to take responsibility for and learn how to deal with what we can say is similar for all, which I see people who have eyes and ears to hear with. They are first and foremost moving up north, wherever country you are in, the tendency to move up north, to go rural, to live simplistic, to minimize expenses, to learn as if the power grid goes, then I can survive no matter what. If the water supply goes, I can survive no matter what. So that the fear of lack is not there, because we know whatever happens, we can deal with it because we prepared ourselves for it. And if you're asking, is this prepping and stockpiling for whatever, I would say always have at least rice and pasta or whatever for 3 weeks. And you would say, well, that demands water, and water runs on electricity and onward and so forth. And you're absolutely right. So that also means we need to think, okay, what happens if there's no water? How do we then do, etc., etc. So this is a drill we need to go through in a way without creating fear, how we can prepare ourselves for if something should happen. How can we then arrange ourselves in a manner so that we can get through whatever's going on whatever level it is. So I still haven't completed that drill, but I know that's something I need to take into consideration as well. Alrighty, so with that, I will stop this recording, because then we'll just do the free talking, and whatever comes up will come up. But this little lecture, I think, was good to have for those of you who need to re-listen or whatever. I think it's pretty clear. As always, this is how things look now. If inner Earth choose to do something, that might change, but I don't get the feel that they want to intervene too much, because these are the laws of the cycles. This is old karma. It has gone so far. It has run past the point where there could be a possibility of amplifying something that could counter it. So it's on its evaporation path, whatever that means. And that always means more chaos. So the focus would be, for any reasonable civilization, would be to focus on the secondary timeline and give energy to that one and give understanding to that one, so that those of us who can do the shift into the secondary, we will do so to the best of our abilities. Will we be supported by inner Earth? Not at all. They are always, these groups, the advanced civilizations, never interfere with individuals. They always work on the reality field. So it's being given as possibilities within the reality field construction, and not as on an individual level. So that's very, very important to understand that, because it's like the old saying where you have hungry people and you throw them fish, then they get saturated, or they get full, and they eat the fish and they're no hungry anymore. But they get hungry again. And then they will want you to throw more fish, right? So it's easier just to go in and teach them how to fish, so that they can get their own fish. They can go out and do what they need to do to make sure that they won't get hungry again. And that's how these groups operate. So that's important to take that into consideration. Whatever happens, this is still a dynamic we need to learn. That's the true power or empowerment, that no matter what happens, we can solve it. We can find a way to deal with it. We can resolve it and dissolve it, whatever, if you want to do the re and the d and the die and whatever in front of the solving. But the point is that we have the means and the skills to do so, because we have trained ourselves into figuring out, okay, whatever comes my way, I'll figure out a way to deal with it. And whatever other people do is how they are going to do it. Just bear in mind that the 2-8 pillars about the others, and if that foundationally is in polarity, dynamics, or as in segregation with two oppositions that are no longer playing together to meet the center point, but are falling or pushing each other further and further away from each other, the division is getting sharper and sharper, then it gets more and more difficult to build bridges. And that's the last part of the bifurcation of timelines that we have entered into, where things will snap and no longer have any connection points whatsoever. Alrighty.